broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by theunshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's WilmsFront featured interview show on this Thursday, the 17th of February, 2022. We are back live on the WilmsFront YouTube and DLive channels, as well as the Enhanced Entropy software, where you can interact with myself and my guests throughout the evening. It is 8:30 p.m. here in Melbourne, Victoria, where tomorrow night there will be some slight easing of COVID rules, but nowhere near enough, in my opinion. Well, I think we should get rid of all of them right now, like England and Denmark have. So we have hospitality back to full capacity, no more of that square meter stuff. Dance floors are back, and QR codes will be gone in retail. I don't know how the boomers will cope without performing the virtue QR code ritual with their camera phone before the shop now. I think they loved it just both for the virtue signaling and to show, look, I can use a smartphone app QR code. I'm not a techno dinosaur. This is despite, now they've been checking in, this is despite the fact that their data had not been used for contact tracing for the last 2 months, and probably would only ever be utilized by hackers hacking into the QR database, which is what happened in New South Wales. Or was revealed that's what happened to the New South Wales QR code data this week. They're also scaling their QR code data back. But it's in a consolation for the boomers. They'll still get to put on their masks before their shop. Useless indoor masks will continue for at least another week in Victoria. And of course, they'll always get to sanitize their hands before going into the shops, just under the thing, and then saying, look, I'm hygienic by having this alcohol-like substance, which will burn my hands if I use too much of it. We also have the vaccinated economy here continuing. That will still have the QR check-in, but it looks like Dan has backed down from his threat to include the booster as part of the vaccine mandate and passport system. Perhaps he's looked over at the bin fire currently occurring in Western Australia, where my guest tonight is trapped in Marx McGowan's McPhailed state. He has keeping the borders shut indefinitely, though there is rumour that he'll open them in time for the AFL season. Over West, everyone is required to have 3 vaccines, but that hasn't stopped the virus, with another 177 new local cases recorded to this for the state, and the supermarket shelves are starting to empty now. Now, my guest tonight, trapped in Western Australia, is Septimus Kane. She's a legal scholar, artist, musician, and Christian based in Perth. On her social media, she has produced extensive research about the continued infiltration and influence to our nation by the creators of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the Chinese Communist Party, and recently published a paper documenting Mark McGowan's CCP collaborations. As I said, he still hasn't set a date for reopening the border, but last week Remix Matrix released what could possibly be his next press conference.
Good afternoon, everyone. My message to other states of Australia is very clear. To be honest with you, I don't like you. And to be frank with you, I'm tired of listening to their whinging. They never stop whinging, but I'm pleased. I'm happy. I think this is a great opportunity to announce our plan for a new Western Australian kingdom. We will be cutting off the people of Western Australia from the rest of the world forever. We're on the verge of a new chapter. A chapter that will see my government re-elected, not only for my entire life, but also for thousands and thousands and thousands of years into the future. We will be the biggest superpower in the world. Every family and every household and every person across WA will be required to respect my government. We will put a police officer on every single person in the state. People engaging in non-compliance will face consequences as harsh as humanly possible. I will be an eternal God, a shining light that people worship for generations. I will be king, even when I die. I'll be the strongest man in history.
Septimus, welcome to WilmsFront.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Now, is it true what Mark McGowan tells his subjects, that you're the envy of the world?
Yeah, I'm sort of like, I'm really disliking Mark McGowan at the moment. I mean, that's me being polite. He is kind of
He can be impolite on this show.
Okay, so he's kind of taking on this dictatorial role that is against the law. He's a man that's supposed to have done a law degree, except recently, like a couple of days ago now, he mandated this jab on ease. So that breaks clear constitutional provisions around representative government. So he's basically breaking the law. I don't know how he's managing to get away with this. You know, the Labor Party, they rely on unlawful tactics to actually get ahead, because they've now also mandated the juice on courts as well. So to actually bring a case, you need to be jabbed. So that's sort of pushed out any sort of dissent already. So yeah, we're in a bit of a pickle here.
And since the March 2021 state election, it's basically a one-party state. Mark McGowan's Labor Party has 53 of 59 seats in the lower house and a majority in the upper house. And, well, a Victorian Labor MLC learnt what happens if a Labor MP dares cross the floor. They get expelled, and so all those Labor MPs are going to vote for anything McGowan says, and so he's basically got absolute power now. Basically,
so he can basically shove through whatever law that he sees fit. Yeah, that election was horrific. It was probably one of the worst because so much is at stake. I think we lost a few seats as well, so they just gained up everything. I remember because I was part of a campaign for an independent, and while we were doing this campaigning, we saw all these
Which independent
signs.
Was that?
Yeah, she was an independent. But we were seeing all these signs with Labor candidates, and next to them was Mark McGowan. Like, his face was always on every poster. So the selling point for that Labor campaign was Mark McGowan. But recently he's actually lost quite a bit of support. So even the West Australians coming out with press these days surrounding the fact that he flipped on his border promise. So he lost a bit of support from that.
Oh, your screen's frozen.
Yeah, people are starting.
Oh, your screen just froze for a moment there.
Oh, so yeah, people are starting to question his tactics now, and I think it's very obvious when food starts disappearing on shelves that these mandates just blatantly are illogical. They don't work. They do nothing other than ravage our economy. People are starting to wake up to that because food is running out on shelves. So
his approval rating, well, he still has a majority support. Was at 64% approval rating now, which is down from 91. But that's still quite a tumble. And the Omicron wave, it's only just started to take off, and will keep going off. The last COVID zero jurisdictions are falling. Western Australia, New Zealand, they had a record 1,500 new cases today, and also Hong Kong as well, while the rest of the world, we're coming off our Omicron wave. And Mark McGowan's done, as has been reported, nothing to prepare the hospital system.
Yeah, we've been preparing for the hospital system since the beginning of the pandemic. He's been shoveled, tons of money to be able to prep these so-called hospitals for all these COVID outbreaks. But we're still not prepped according to his standards. So yeah, he takes money. The Labor Party is known to take money, to misuse money, and it doesn't really help anything. They just plunge us further into debt.
Though he seems to have bolstered the police powers in enforcement, because there certainly seems to be a lot of police enforcing masks and vaccine mandates, including that horrific incident a couple of weeks ago now, where a cop interrupted a Catholic church mass to check mask exemptions, which you're a Christian, entering a holy house like that's abhorrent.
Yeah, and apparently, just from what I've heard, apparently he wasn't just asking for masks, he was asking for vaccine requirements too, that hasn't been mandated on churches yet, so that's a step out of his power. But honestly, what's been happening to the church, and this is what the communists do, they target churches. You see this right before communist infiltration. They'll target the pushback and the dissent. So that happens to be conservatives and the church. So I think that's why they're going hard at conservatives at the moment and churches, because we're the pushback to this grand commie regime that they're planning on enacting. So I think that's why they're targeting us in particular.
And there was also a business that was forcibly shut down and the owners arrested because not all their staff were vaccinated. It was uncovered.
Yeah, I didn't hear too much about that, in honesty. But yeah, stuff like that is happening, and it just does nothing other than ruin small businesses. And, who owns a lot of the small businesses? A lot of the times it is actually conservatives. So again, it's targeting, the sort of smaller economy. And it does nothing other than create a centralization of power. So you see more money going into the big guys, and the bigger companies eat up the smaller companies. That's what we're seeing, a greater centralization of power. So this is all what is the Great Reset. That's basically essentially what the Great Reset is. It's a communist regime, and we're literally witnessing that.
Though you mentioned that the West Australian newspaper, which is owned by Kerry Stokes, who owns Channel 7 over there, basically has almost monopoly on press in Western Australia and also has mining interests. He's flipped turned on MaoGowan after propping him up for 2 years through his media. But big business is also abandoning him, which I wanted to pick up when you mentioned, because Wesfarmers, one of the big retailers, they own Bunnings, Kmart, Target and Officeworks. They're actually, because of the hard border, going to be relocating their head office from Perth to over east, and a number of other companies are considering that as well. And if MaoGowan loses the media and the business interests, I know that there's a few mining magnates who still support the hard border. Even Gina Reinhardt did. He doesn't have that absolute support, both in the public and the various stakeholder elites.
Yeah, his empire is beginning to crumble slowly. The mainstream press will be a big factor into what determines his success in future. So yeah, people are starting, because you cannot implement all these mandates and have big businesses not suffer either. So they will come and, you know, they will come to terms with the fact that these mandates pushed by McGowan are actually impinging upon their own businesses as well. So they can't ignore that fact. And it was illogical. It was illogical for McGowan to flip on that border stance. You know, we've got an outbreak, you know, here. The vaccine mandates didn't prevent an outbreak like we all knew they wouldn't. The mandates did nothing because here we are with COVID still. So people are starting to realise, you know, these things don't do anything other than ravage our economy conveniently for China.
And as you mentioned, the food's starting to run out, and McGowan, he basically hoodwinked the WA people to we can be completely self-sufficient. The East leech off us, but what has actually led to this current food shortage is the flooding of the Nullarbor transit route, both the road and the rail. I made the joke that you're already North Korea and that there's a famine brewing.
Yes, I've heard mixed things. I mean, I'm not in the Nullarbor, so I have no idea what's going on there. But I've heard the weather is partially why food supply trucks have had a hard time coming in here. The other reason is truckies having to quarantine and stuff like this, and it gets to a point where quarantining and stuff damages the business. So it's just more convenient for them to not even get here. So there's like strategic reasons for why these truckies aren't even delivering food here at the moment, like business strategy. So that's why, unfortunately, we're running out of some supplies. There's still quite a bit there, you know, there's still quite a bit of food on the shelf. So we're not in famine mode just yet.
No, but you don't have the extensive choice.
Yeah, our choices are being limited. Like I went to the store the other day to get my favorite cold pressed juice and found out this stuff's not in stock anymore. I literally survive off that stuff. So yeah, it's impacted me for sure and other people. Yeah.
And I think it was just before McGowan's border backflip, which it's definitely backfired on him. It hasn't gone the way that he thought it would. Your new health minister, Amber Jade Sanderson, she was mercifully mocked for claiming that us over in the West were in lockdown by default, and using the food on the shelf, not being on the shelf as the proof. And we're all like laughing our heads off over here. It's like, what, we've got the Australian Open going on here. Like us here in Melbourne, Victoria, we know what a lockdown looks like. And there was a freedom rally on that weekend where she said that, and Victoria Police didn't shoot rubber bullets at protesters, didn't choke people for not wearing masks outside. That's a lockdown. And even Dan mocked her and said, oh, I can get our ambassadors to talk. And when Dan's like mocking his Labor counterparts over West, I think he was just pleased that he's no longer considered the biggest COVID tyrant down under.
Yeah. Oh, it looks like they're competing for who's Klaus Schwab's most beloved pet at the moment, in honesty.
Or competing for Xi Jinping's affection.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Because obviously it was in the spotlight more that Dan had signed the memorandum for the Belt and Road program, which was torn up by the federal government's new legislation, but it hasn't been covered to the same extent. Mark MaoGowan. There's like, what name do you prefer? I put in the title Marx McGowan. There's also
Mr. McCommunism, you know, Mr. McClown, all of those ones. Yeah.
McGulag as well. The new one is McPhail.
Yeah. Yeah, and his mandates make no mixed sense either. So, yeah. Yeah, the feds ripped up Belt and Road. That is true. And what we're seeing is the states are actually This was actually talked about in Stealth War. This book is a really good book to read, this one here, because it basically talks about how Australia is the communist testing ground, and they rely on state infiltration. They rely on local infiltration. This is the Chinese Communist Party, because it's a lot and then work their way into this nation. But it's like the external affairs are supposed to be handled by the federal government. They're not supposed to be handled by the state. So what we're seeing with Dan Andrews and Mark McGowan, you know, signing on to deals with CCP, you know, collaborating with them heavily. Mark McGowan extended the sister relationship WA has with Zhejiang. I think that's how you pronounce it. But yeah, he's collaborating with the CCP. But this is an external affairs issue. It shouldn't be handled by the states. So we're seeing them sort of encroach into legal spaces they shouldn't be touching. So yeah, that's what's happening. And the federal government claims to be anti-CCP. That is true on the surface, except why has Scott Morrison and the feds implemented this jab scheme, you know, with the help of Gavi Vaccine Alliance, which is tied to the Chinese Communist Party. They've implemented that scheme. Gavi is tied to Bill Gates. Gavi, and Bill Gates is praised openly by Xi Jinping. So Bill Gates is tied to the Chinese Communist Party. He's working for the Chinese Communist Party alongside Fauci. And so if the feds don't understand this, they can cut Belt and Road. Like, that gives the semblance that they're doing, you know, their due defense of the country, except underneath the table, they're funneling a bunch of cash into alliances connected back to the WHO and connected back to Gates, which is basically, it's essentially helping the CCP. So they're not doing nowhere near enough to protect this nation from the Chinese Communist Party, and they don't seem to understand the Chinese Communist Party's tactics and how they operate.
The book that you held up there, who's that by?
This one is Robert Spalding. So he's a brigadier general. He's anti-jab, interestingly, because I think he understands that the CCP, they're very insidious with their warfare strategy and tactics. They're very subtle. So the jab scheme does nothing. I mean, it doesn't stop a pandemic. It just ravages our economy. It pushes out conservatives and pushes out, you know, the church from the economy, essentially. It's a ploy to ravage our economy so they can further infiltrate. So, you know, a lot of people who are interested in warfare research and who know the CCP and how they operate, a lot of them are, you know, exposing the jab scheme for what it is, which is probably a bioweapons agenda.
What are you referring to as the jab scheme?
Oh, just jabs mandate policy.
I mean, we followed the CCP pandemic response almost to a T in Australia. The Chinese, they pioneered the lockdowns, which were never ever considered previously as part of a pandemic response, with first the Wuhan lockdown, and like China, we pursued until it was clear that it was fool's folly, COVID zero. WA lockdown a few times over single cases. We had the extended lockdowns here in Melbourne, Victoria, to try to get down back to zero. And China, because it has also a zero human rights policy, was able to, for a long time, maintain COVID zero. And that's probably why Australia, for the most part, did it with human rights abuses, police brutality, and cruel border closures as well. But that, like you're alluding to, the Australian government wouldn't admit that we fell into the following the CCP's strategy policies.
Yeah. Don't you think it makes okay, so you know the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
Yes.
If you go to the international partners on the Wuhan Institute of Virology's website, there's the WHO listed there. So the WHO essentially gave us and instigated this pandemic. At the beginning stages of the pandemic was abysmal. And there's argument to actually suggest that they mishandled it for CCP's economic gain. There's no evidence for that. We're talking about common sense. You know, the WHO is working for the interests of the CCP. It's not working for the interests of other nations. So their policy response is going to benefit the CCP over other nations. So the politicians firstly need to understand that. And there's been blatant evidence of how the WHO mishandled this pandemic. And why would they do that? Because again, they're not looking out for Australia's best interests. And these are people, I mean, Gates essentially controls the WHO. He's actually writing a book. I think he's already written it. It's set to be published, where he discusses his relationship with Tedros from the WHO. And we know Tedros has CCP connections too. So the WHO cannot be trusted. So why would we follow the policy response of this organization that's tied back to the lab that actually gave us this virus? It makes absolutely no sense. It's a conflict of interest that the government is avoiding. I don't know why Scott Morrison's avoiding that conflict of interest, but he's very quiet on that.
Well, Australia initially perpetuated the approved narrative that it came from a wet market, and part of their tough on China approach was that China needs to outlaw these wet markets. But I'm not sure if because they had intelligence that it could have been a lab leak, which is now acceptable to say, and most people believe is the most likely origin of SARS-CoV-2. They pushed for the independent international investigation, which of course China wasn't happy about, and slapped all the various tariffs and trade sanctions, which in fact backfired on China. They had fuel and food shortages themselves, which is why it was good not to give in to their letter of demand. But I am going on my own tangent here, basically bringing up a history that may have been memory hold. But yeah, we had obviously the wet market theory, which worked for China because it could never be traced back to their negligence.
Yeah, and we saw a lot of actually suppress the lab leak theory, interestingly, at the beginning as well. So that's Fauci, that's Bill Gates, Peter Daszak, who was on the WHO inquiry. That's a conflict of interest because Peter Daszak was part of the Eco Health Alliance, which is partner to the lab. Seeing these key figures that are pro-CCP actually suppress the lab leak theory. Obviously, I mean, why would they suppress this theory? Because it makes China look bad. It makes them look bad. So our government has a duty to investigate.
You mentioned the WHO links with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but almost every Western power has had a hand in assisting it. I mean, it was a co-production with the French, but when it was opened, the Chinese kicked the French out, and it was basically like sucked in. This is our lab now. And of course there was the money that Dr. Fauci is through the NIH or his branch of the NIH was funneling to the Wuhan lab to perform the gain of function research, which again, there's all these various naive collaborations, which whether it be whether it be from the French or the various tentacles of the US deep state.
Yeah, there's a lot of naivety going on. And, you know, I've got this paper here. I'll just pull out a quote by Mark McGowan. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So Mark McGowan said, the idea that somehow we should be promoting the idea of armed conflict with a superpower is madness. And I don't get why there are the senior Commonwealth government officials, why there are Defence Force officers, why there are senior politicians in the Liberal Party talking about this. It's absolute madness. So he's indicating like it's insane to think that there's a conflict between Australia and China. So again, we see a lot of this naivety. There's no excuse for the man to be naive. I mean, has he not? He knows CCP well. He's been set up.
He
with
thinks
all these
he
CCP
knows
by the consulate generals. He knows CCP, and I don't understand how people can be that close and chummy with people who actually have national interests that are different to ours. And they're not only different to ours, but actually they're waging grey zone economic war on this country. And they've been doing that for years. And McGowan is assisting the CCP in that goal. It defies logic. And he's had military experience. I think he was a military lawyer or something. Don't quote me on that, but he should know better. Having had those Navy connections or whatever, Army connections, he should know better about defence of the country. He's not defending Australia's interests right now. He's actually giving them away to the CCP. So he's benefiting the CCP's economy. He funneled, I think it was $5 million into the Changhua Association. You know, that taxpayer money is money that Australians worked hard for, thinking it's going to go into supporting locals, into supporting our Australian businesses. We don't expect that taxpayer money to be funneled into companies and organisations that don't benefit Australians. So people need to start asking these questions and investigating Mark McGowan's so-called naivety.
It's either naivety or he's a communist sympathizer like Dan Andrews. And they always, Dan is similar to McGowan in this regard, saying it's all about the jobs and the economy. We need to get along with our biggest trading partner. They make it an economic argument that if we
they do.
Basically it is if we stood up to them and we got managed to unweed their insidious infiltration from our institutions, then we'd be economically ruined. Well, I think they also believe that they'd be economically ruined. But what I was referring to before about when China slapped on all those tariffs and trade sanctions and said, if you don't meet these 14 demands, then we'll never lift the sanctions. There were people, and it's both the left and the right. There's plenty of neoliberal CCP sympathizers who basically say, just give in, give China whatever it wants and then some more. But as has occurred with China self-destructing because of its own COVID-0 policy, and it's got no imports. If you don't blink, the trade sanctions, they destroy the CCP itself.
Yeah, see, I mean, what we're seeing in China with their COVID-0 policy, remember, that's only what's being televised to the rest of the world. Who actually knows what's happening in their own country?
There have been protests like that have broken out in lockdown cities against the continuing lockdowns, which like that's unthinkable in
Yeah.
that country.
Yeah, I was talking, this was a while ago, I was talking to a Falun Gong member, and she told me that China's on the brink of like a civil war, basically. So the people there have had enough, you know. So yeah, who knows what they're actually televising. They're very good at propaganda. They're very good at psychological warfare. So, and tricking, I mean, they trick the world into thinking there's this lethal pandemic that demands lockdowns and mandates. Think about how cunning you have to be to actually deceive the world into buying into this notion. So if they can deceive the world of that massive issue, I mean, they can deceive the world about what it is they're actually doing in their country. Who actually knows what's going down at the moment in that country? I don't.
And obviously the Winter Beijing Olympics are continuing, and I still can't believe that the leadership of the CCP think that if we see flashing lights at opening and closing ceremony, we'll all be mesmerized on the TV thinking, wow, look how advanced China looks. They are awesome, and just overlook their human rights abuses and how they've tried to bully Australia and other Western nations. And this is another thing that's beginning to unwind. Those sorts of, well, basically, you could call it literal stars and lights. I mean, they might suck in a few people, but not to the effect they used to.
No. Yeah, they'll push, oh, we're having this, you know, little sports game. Do the neighboring countries want to come join in? Well, according to Dr. Li Meng, they could be releasing another virus potentially at the Olympics.
Yes, I've heard about
this.
She's a doctor in Hong Kong, because there's been rumors that China has also been locking down because of outbreaks of hemorrhage fever, which is an Ebola type virus, which Ebola is not like an airborne influenza like COVID is. It's a exchange through bodily fluids, which is why it's so prevalent in Africa. But if it's been engineered or experimented on, it could be something else if there's truth to that.
Yeah, and we know from, you know, books like Unrestricted Warfare, we know already that the CCP have, you know, biological warfare tactics, you know, up their sleeve. They conduct gain-of-function research. So we need to understand that they're not afraid to meddle with bioweaponry, essentially. And according to Rand Paul, they're experimenting at the same lab with viruses up to 50% mortality rates. So if we think COVID is the last little, pandemic these people have considered releasing, we've got to think again. They're still experimenting with these things, and we've got to be extremely cautious, because the next pandemic might not be so mild, and also they would have learned from their mistakes at this time, and they wouldn't have released. I think it was accidental, possibly, the release, because they wouldn't have released it in China if they wanted to escape liability. So they would have learned from their mistakes and released it somewhere like an Olympic Games, where it's very hard to trace where these things came from. So they're going to play it smarter in future. Be very careful.
But they'd be prepared to sacrifice their own people for their own advancement. But the reason why the most likely origin is a lab leak is because it is a weird virus in terms of, and the reason why it has been able to spread so rapidly all across the world, despite all quarantining, testing, isolation, is because of asymptomatic transmission. And this was also how Western governments were also able to justify the lockdowns. Well, you might feel well, but you could be killing the next person you come into contact with, kill your grandma when you go to see them. And this was a tactic that was used to divide citizens throughout the West, like view the unmasked person as the enemy, which maybe when China was figuring out their own response, they sort of thought this has actually worked out, this accident, better than we thought.
Yeah. We're seeing, again, they wage a variety of different warfare tactics. So again, division is something that is actually good for the enemy. They want us to all be divided, because if we can't organize, if we can't collaborate, we're obviously going to find it harder to push back against them. So divide and conquer, it's a very, it's an old warfare strategy, but it's a classic. It works, and that's what's happening. And they've created this two-tier society with this jab scheme, which is actually ushering people into a social credit system, just like China. So how do you get this social credit system enacted? Well, you've got to make it look desirable to enact certain behaviors. So if they create conflict around this jab issue, people are going to want to stick up their hand and be like, oh, I'm the good citizen that got jabbed, and they're not going to mind a social credit system or a social credit score. So this is all part of the strategy to divide people and to create unrest, and to also usher us into a social credit system where people will willingly line up for things if they're seen as less divisive to others because they've bought into this vaccine mandate.
And China also knows how to weaponize identity politics against the West, which it's already divided much of the West. But the CCP knows how to play on that, create a sense of moral relativism. Oh, you shouldn't criticize us on the Uyghurs. You racist. You beheaded and executed Afghani civilians, which there's already a huge anti-Australian lobby here. I mean, they mainly exist on Twitter, basically take anyone's side apart from Australia. And so the CCP knows that's easy to, and another form of division, because where the Western nations, US, UK, Australia, we're the evil nations now, and we have no moral high ground. I mean, obviously with the lockdowns and human rights abuses here, we've lost a lot of the moral high ground, but still way more free than China.
Yeah, absolutely right. They're waging identity politics tactics on us. And who spearheads a lot of this identity politics stuff? It's actually the UN and it's the WHO. Again, China's a permanent member of the UN, and again, China's heavily tied to the WHO. So it's the same organizations. It's the same, organizations spearheading all of these, strange ideologies that we really didn't see a few years ago. They're all being pushed on us at the same time, actually, conveniently. Like you see Black Lives Matter, the climate change agenda as well. It's all being pushed at around the same time, pushed by the same players, the WHO and the UN, who are both CCP tied. So it looks like, they're using these ideologies to again ruin our culture, ruin the West, because they know that taking these fundamental principles that actually made our country great, freedoms and conservative values, they know that taking that away from us is actually going to open us up to warfare. So again, it's the same tactics they're using. Once you kind of figure out how their methods, once you kind of figure out the ideologies they latch onto and push, it becomes very obvious. I mean, Bill Gates has been pushing this climate change agenda. He's been pushing the identity politics stuff too. He's just a minion of CCP. I'd be interested to hear what you think actually about who's pulling the strings here. Is it the globalists or is it CCP? I'm of the view that's actually CCP pulling the strings of the globalists, and the globalists are like the face of authoritarianism, but be careful about pushing stuff like the Great Reset, so they've stayed behind the scenes and let the globalists do that when it's really a CCP ploy. What do you think?
I think it's an unholy alliance because World Economic Forum, they've been wanting to, in the technological age, the digital revolution, they've been, in their view, it's creating a global integrated economic and social system is to their advantage, and obviously China is pioneering that with their social credit system. The Davos World Economic Forum and conferences, they're about the world coming into like one regulatory digital system. And it's no coincidence that Klaus Schwab opened this year's virtual Davos, the virtual lair, as I call it, with Xi Jinping, and heaped praise on him.
Yeah. Yeah, so they don't even hide the fact that they're pro-CCP. You know, this is all in your face. That's what shocks me. It's the fact that, not a lot of people have actually realized what's going on, even when it's actually quite blatant and obvious what they're doing. That's what shocks me. And the feds are like, oh, we're anti-CCP. Are you, Scott Morrison? He's got a web page on the WEF's website. You know, his face is on there. So if you're actually anti-CCP, like you claim to be, why are you collaborating with the WEF? Why are you collaborating with Gates and all these players heavily tied to China? It makes absolutely no sense. And it's obvious what they're doing. They're not hiding it. So Scott Morrison, you know, can get away with just saying blatant things like, oh, the vaccine mandates, you know, it's not a Commonwealth issue. It's the state's issue. I'm thinking, dude, it was your dream.
He created the vaccine certificates. He created the Medicare Express Plus app, and had them integrated with all the various state QR check-in systems. It's like, he can't claim I didn't do any of this.
He's a blatant liar. That's actually what he's done. He's lied to the Australian people, and he thinks the Australian people are too stupid to get away with it. He thinks they're too stupid to figure it out. Well, people are figuring it out.
Well, we've seen in this parliamentary sitting fortnight, after this week, there's only the budget week, and then we're into a federal election mode. Scott Morrison and Defence Minister Peter Dutton go really hard against Labor, being weak and sympathetic to the CCP, which I agree that Labor is. I mean, you had Albanese at his press club address say that, we can both have a good economic relationship with China while also call out their human rights abuses. That's sort of like saying, we can trade well with Nazi Germany, but also call out their concentration camps and internment of the Jews. I mean, that's how can you say you're a defender of human rights when you're happy to do all these wheeling and dealing? It's the Morrison government. They've also dug up from the archives the deputy Labor leader Richard Miles in 2019 wanted closer defence ties with China, which is a bit different from saying that the Labor wants closer economic ties with China. And then the Global Times, which is China, the Chinese Communist Party's global mouthpiece. This is it's actually by an Australian, Bruce Haig. So the Global Times this week said that it would be better for Australia-Chinese relations if if Albanese was prime minister, and of course Penny Wong, the would-be foreign affairs minister, she's said in her speeches we need to placate China and be much nicer to them, and the would-be Home Affairs Minister Christina Keneally, she spends a lot of her time attacking Australian patriots. She's even attacked the Unshackled in op-eds, but it seems to accidentally keep attending events with CCP influences there.
Penny Wong sounds like a CCP spy to me. I mean, I don't know. But if you go to the Hansard, she wanted tons of money to shoveled into the Gavi vaccine alliance, which again is just aiding Gates and the CCP. So it's interesting that she'd push for more money to be going into organizations like that. It's just a bit odd, isn't it, Penny? Someone should investigate that.
Or is it Penny Wong? Her ancestry is Malaysian Chinese, so family's not from mainland China, but she's obviously, everyone knows that she speaks with an Australian accent. She was born and raised here. It's more like she's just a sucker or gets sucked into the former Labor leaders who are now CCP stooges, Paul Keating and Bob Carr. Because it seems to be that Labor just sort of because they just want to take the easy road, and also think that the way to get Chinese Australian votes is to say nice things about the CCP, which I think it's a disgusting thing to just assume that all Chinese Australians love the CCP and think that any criticism of the CCP is racist against Chinese.
Yeah, it's not only disgusting, it's actually like it's cultural misappropriation, because Chinese people that come to Australia chose to live here in Australia. They're not in China anymore, interestingly. So why did they leave? I mean, a lot of the reason is because of the politics. They're not happy with it. I've spoken to many Chinese people who are in this country who don't like the CCP. I mean, they've gotten out of China for obvious reasons. So I think it's a blatant lie to think, it's stupid of politicians to be like, oh, we're just going to praise the CCP and whatever because we'll get more support from our Chinese citizens. I mean, you're actually doing yourself a disservice by taking on that stance. Oh, you're on mute, by the way.
Oh, I'm back now.
I
was going to go on to say that it's part of the CCP's insidious warfare to use its United Front group to infiltrate and then spread disinformation in Chinese Australian community groups. They're not just in these community groups in the physical sense, but also on Chinese language social media in Australia.
Yeah, trolls, shills, the Chinese Communist Party use them a lot. I've noticed there's a lot of Chinese trolls and shills on Getter, actually. So I think they actually target alternative platforms too, and they go troll people, and yeah, these are just classic tactics. They rely on social media a lot, actually. They invest a lot of their energy into social media because they know that's how it's info war, it's psychological warfare. Social media is where it's at. And so they put all these CCP shills and all that there and try and manipulate the debate. And yeah, I've seen a lot of that.
And probably the biggest, most effective counter voice to these CCP social media trolls is Drew Pavlou, who's running for the Senate with his Democracy Alliance party, and he gives it straight back to these CCP strolls and really exposes just how childish and sensitive the CCP is. I mean, his comments like when they vowed, "Oh, Australia will pay for having a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics." He's like, "Have a sook." Like they put out these various Chinese CCP spokespeople, all of these empty threats, temper tantrums, and which it just exposes them as just hypersensitive adult children.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. CCP, they don't like being mocked. That's one thing the CCP don't like. So anything that makes light of them, they're not a huge fan of. And also, they fear being exposed. I mean, think about it. If you're the type of person or organization or polity or whatever that uses insidious such tactics, it means you fear exposure. So what's our tactic to actually gain our country back? It's actually just exposing their tactics. A lot of people aren't aware what these CCP tactics are. Like, they wage grey zone economic war. People are, waiting, they're putting their hopes in the submarines, the subs, and they're thinking China's going to wage some gun or nuclear war. China doesn't operate like that, actually. They're much more with their tactics. And why would you blow up on all their infrastructure and man? That's not the best and most efficient, intelligent way to infiltrate a country. You want to keep the infrastructure in place. You want to keep the systems in place and incrementally start hijacking these systems. That's what CCP do. So if people are aware, I think if they're more, if they read up on CCP and just expose their tactics, we can gain it back. It can happen, but people need to reading and expose their tactics. And the jab scheme is paramount to gaining back this nation's economy and our freedoms and ending the pandemic mandates.
And we'll talk about the pandemic now. It's almost, I think, on March 1 this year is when I call it the March Madness began, and the panic in the West. I remember it was March 1, 2020, when the toilet paper started flying off the shelf, and by the end of the month, the whole nation was in lockdown. It would be great by March of this year if all of our respective state governments got rid of all the masks, all the QR code, vax mandates and passports, because even the experts now, the health experts, are saying there's no continued medical scientific basis for continued vaccine mandates. This was in the Age this week, which it shows that these mandates and passports, they're about control, not about your health. And we also make sure I click on the right story here, that it's basically becoming more and more acceptable to tell the truth about masks, that they hardly made any difference to transmission. They were more just sort of a virtue signal to, look, I care about people, and also, and as a obedience muzzle. I mean, you've got the mask mandates over there. We still have them over here, but hardly anyone gets fined for not wearing a mask over here. Well, they did find some Liberal MPs this week, but that's because they fined Dan Andrews himself last year when he walked from his car to the Parliament without a mask on. But again, the masks were more about compliance control than actual medical science.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, it can cause, what I heard, it can cause greater issues because there's like moisture that collects in masks. It's like a breeding ground for bacteria. Like
Yeah.
I've got a history of asthma. Like I don't have asthma now, but I had it in the past. And so I just tell people, if they ask me why I'm not wearing a mask, yeah, I've got an exemption. I had asthma. They just leave me alone. So it's not like I'm not scared that they're going to fine me necessarily, but it's more of a scare tactic, like you're saying. It's more of a political scare tactic rather than anything to do with health. I mean, these mandates, they're anti-health. I mean, stay locked up in your home where you avoid vitamin D, which is the very thing you need to stop the virus. I mean, they're not about health. They were never about health. This pandemic was not actually about health. It was a political agenda from the beginning.
I mean, there's still a lot of COVID zero experts who are still subliminally advocating for lockdown and more vaccines and more masks. There's the Aussage outfit. A lot of their members come from Western Australia. I'm not sure if you've heard of Dr. Zoe Hyde at University of Western Australia. She infamously said that anal swab tests on school children would provide more accurate PCR test results. There's also a dentist in WA, Mark Tennant, who's repeatedly called for lockdowns when your first cluster of cases appeared earlier this year. Dr. David Berger, he's COVID, almost a COVID zero fanatic, because he thinks that we can also eliminate the common cold as well. But thankfully, there's more counter actual scientific health expert, infectious diseases experts, virologists who say, look, get rid of the masks now, get rid of the mandates, the QR codes, the passports, and we actually don't need any more jabs beyond the third. It's not a sustainable strategy, boosters every 6 months. That's what Sharon Lewin, director of the Doherty Institute, said. So there is a larger counter scientific lobby now.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, the experts did try and tell people that at the beginning, but they were censored. Dr. Robert Malone, Dr. Peter McCullough, all of those people, they were completely censored. Now their voices are being heard because people have turned to alt platforms. But now it's like you don't even need the science to know that these mandates don't work. You can use your eyes. I mean, that's the good thing about having eyeballs. You can actually use them and figure out that, these mandates that were in place did nothing to stop an outbreak. Look at Israel. They have like some of the highest jab rates there, and you just see cases skyrocketing. So people can use their eyes now. There's enough data out there where you can make correlations. You don't actually have to be a rocket scientist to figure out these mandates don't work. So that's, I think, partly why I think the narrative's crumbling, because we don't need that opinion anymore when the common layman can use their eyes and see they don't work.
Well, Israel was the poster nation for the initial booster, because after they boosted much of their population, their curve went down again. They flattened their curve again. Then when it went up with Omicron, they tried to shut the border again, but Omicron still went in. And they had, I think, the highest infection rate per capita in the world with their Omicron wave. And they rolled out the fourth dose, the second booster, and it made no difference. And they had, a twin waves of flu and COVID, the Florona winter. And so the experts are saying, the fourth jab, it's not really doing much.
Yeah. And also, I think the way government has been mandating it has made people suspicious, because there is research to indicate that if you actually mandate things on civilians, they're less likely to want to do them. So you never want to have a mandated vaccine response. You actually never want to have a mandated vaccination policy, because it can actually be counterintuitive. And look, we've seen protests and all that spring up because of this. So it creates social unrest when things take a tyrannical leaning. So it makes no sense why they'd mandate it. And so people start realizing this is something political. It's not to do with health, because if the jabs worked, you wouldn't need to mandate them. It would be self-evident and people would blindly for them. It's just very odd that, Fauci, the guy behind Moderna as well, Fauci, Bill Gates, who's tied back to the parent organization of the Wuhan lab, very good pals with Fauci, Gates is. He talks about his relationship with Fauci in his upcoming book. So this guy who's invested in coronavirus research and has very strong ties with Fauci, who conducted bioweapons research, essentially, this guy is rolling out the global jab scheme. So that's actually weird. And people are asking questions about, okay, so the people who created the pandemic also rolling out the jab scheme. That's also why people are waking up. They're realizing that's a conflict of interest that hasn't been explored by the government. And they're seeing with their own eyes the vaccine side effects, the jab adverse reactions. I know people who've had myocarditis. I'm in the age range where people are most susceptible, kids and younger people, girls and boys alike. We're actually the most at risk, and they're gone and mandated this at universities. It defies logic. It defies the studies. It defies the science.
And they're like the case for vaccinating children and the youth, that was sort of borderline the sort of cost benefit analysis, but there is a growing medical consensus that you shouldn't mandate a booster or encourage the really young to get a booster. You should focus on granny to get a booster instead. But with this whole vaccine push, which didn't stop transmission, there was a complete disregard for therapeutic treatments, pills and drugs. There are some new ones that are coming on the market now, therapeutics to treat COVID, which is important for those people. I mentioned elderly, immunosuppressed people to start a treatment regimen as soon as they're diagnosed. There's Merck's oral COVID pill, which basically people can take at home. Pfizer's got one as well. But for the past 2 years, you weren't allowed to talk about any existing therapeutics such as ivermectin to treat COVID. And Russell Broadbent, federal Liberal MP, he's not vaccinated, and there was quite the media shock that he got up in Parliament and said that ivermectin helped treat his recent COVID infection. Like you see the headline here, promotes personal use of a drug banned for COVID-19 treatment. It doesn't matter if it helped him recover or not. The fact he used a banned treatment, although the agent SMH, they went even further and called it horse dewormer. Which is that was one of Joe Rogan's most infamous confrontations with Sanjay Gupta on his podcast, saying, "Your network said I said horse dewormer," and he basically said, "Yeah, we shouldn't have said it," or horse paste or whatever they try to dismiss it as.
Yeah, that's the other weird thing, that this is not just about health, because they've actually suppressed, like the powers that be have suppressed alternative treatments that the studies that have said they actually have worked. Peter McCullough's blowing the lid off that, for example. So not only have they actually, they're not just rolling out a vaccine program, they're actually suppressing alternative treatments. And interestingly, the woman on the WHO, so her name's Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, she is actually on the board of CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness. So this CEPI organization was set up by Bill Gates with the WEF. So Soumya from the WHO is actually on the board of that, or one of the key leading figures, it says on the website. And this is the same woman who suppressed the use of ivermectin at the WHO. So, why would she? Because Gates is going to lose money and the CCP is going to lose money if they go roll out ivermectin, which is remarkably cheaper than a jab rollout. So they wanted these jabs to be mandated. They wanted people to get this jab, it wasn't about health. So it's weird, actually. It's weird why they want people to be jabbed with this thing. I find that odd.
And over east here, as McGowan says, we've had Omicron rip through eastern Australia, which has been mild for about 90, well, in the high 90s% of people who have caught it. And because we had a COVID zero policy for so long, assisted by media propaganda and government and health fear-mongering propaganda, when people got it over this this summer, both the jabbed, unjabbed, it was a mild infection illness. They had mild symptoms. It's like, oh, is that all? Well, we'll just move on now. And that's also why, because when more people get it, it's less they have a personal experience and they get over it. They're like, oh yeah, it was fine. They want to get on with life. And that's I think what well, the new incredible chief health officer of Queensland, Dr. John Gerrard, said that once people deal with it, they just realize, well, it's just another virus. There's nothing magical and mystical about it. It's the fear of the unknown.
Yeah, I think you're right. And at the beginning, maybe we had an argument to have mandates in place and lockdowns because there was the unknown about this virus and the damage.
China and the WHO.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, fine. Like, if you want to roll out some mandates for a bit, just because you're not sure what sort of virus this is, I mean, fine. That's sort of okay, I suppose, if it's really an emergency. But then here we are 2 years later with even more restrictions in place. And that's when you start asking questions, because we have the information indicating it's largely asymptomatic in most people. This is Doherty research as well, indicating that it's mostly asymptomatic in most people. So that's Doherty. So, that's the mainstream science, yet we're sitting here 2 years later with mandates in place. It makes no sense.
And we had the ABS COVID statistics released just in the past week, which it goes this. I grabbed this from, I think, Jared Rennick's page. So there's been it's 2,639 deaths where people died with or from COVID. You're allowed to acknowledge that there are a lot of people. A lot of people are dying with, not necessarily from COVID. The median age of males who died from COVID in Australia, 81.2, same as male life expectancy. Median age of females who died from or with COVID was 86. Life expectancy for females is 85.3. And we're hearing a lot more conversations about that now, that certain people are more susceptible to severe COVID infection, and obviously they PCR all the 273,000 people who've died over the past year. 2 years in Australia of all causes, and so it accounted for roughly, I think, 1% of deaths, people dying with COVID in Australia.
Yeah. So I actually wrote a paper. It was supervised research. So I did a unit on vaccination mandates. And so I looked into caused reaction from COVID. Most from COVID have underlying health issues. Like, that's the vast majority of people who are really at risk of dying. It's people with like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, serious issues like this. Also, if they're immunocompromised and stuff like that. So, if you want to have those people choose to isolate, that's one policy response. I don't think you should ever force people, though, to isolate. That should be an option as well. But people, if they're looking after their own best interests, they would take those measures themselves. They would isolate. They would line up for a vaccine that works. There's no need to force a mandate on people like that if they are vulnerable individuals who are genuinely concerned. So there's no need to mandate it. Yeah.
And if Granny like knows that she's vulnerable, but would rather take the risk, or in her twilight years, and want to spend her final months hugging her children and grandchildren, rather than, well, maybe living a few months longer, but you know, being locked in her nursing home room, she should be able to free to make that choice, rather spend last few months, years actually living, enjoying human social interaction, rather than being locked in a nursing home room for her own health.
That's completely right. I mean, the government is overstepping into civil life, and it's actually dictating our quality of life. And even people like grannies can reject treatment if they want. If they're ready to die, you know, they can actually say, "Look, I don't want treatment." That's not considered like I don't want treatment. So that's actually perfectly legal. It's perfectly fine. What you don't see is people mandating medications on people. When has that ever been legal in this country, to mandate a medication on people? People have the right to refuse medication. So if people have a headache, people have a right to refuse medications if they even work and they know they work. They have a right to say no. But we're not seeing the same thing here with this jab rollout. We're not seeing that. So it's weird. People should always have a right to say no to medical treatment.
And now, going back to what we were talking about, more and more people are like experiencing COVID and realizing that it's mild. We don't actually need all these mandates and COVID rules and restrictions, masks to continues. And this is why the convoys, which were inspired by the Canadian truckers, even though Trudeau has gone full police state, and what is this, with his emergency act and seizing their bank accounts, at the provincial level, the various they're all dropping their mandates and passports like flies. Even Quebec has done a backflip today and getting rid of their vaccine passport system. And this is why
you're on mute again.
Sorry, what did I get up to?
Quebec rolled back their mandates. Yeah. That's all I heard.
Yeah, and we're seeing the inspired by the Canadian convoy, the convoy to Canberra growing by the week. And they're using the same Trudeau tactics by demonizing the convoy members as extremists, potential violent extremists, even though they're extremely peaceful. But we have heard that the federal police, did you hear about this? They might be using insidious long-range acoustic devices to blast the convoy members' eardrums.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, which is it's a form of police brutality. We'd say torture. So Malcolm Roberts asked the AFP commissioner this in Senate estimates. So did Alex Antic. Craig Kelly in the House asked the Speaker Andrew Wallace, can you look into it, since it's your responsibility to look after the parliamentary precinct? There's still all of these tactics used to quietly suppress and, well, literally try and suppress their hearing, these activists.
Yeah. That's one I've never heard of, these acoustic things. So that what is that? That just burst their eardrums. What the heck? That's like assault. That's literally assault.
Yeah, it's
Um,
they're devices that are
it's scary.
used to basically communicate long ranges. Like they can be used for like mass communication if they need to tell like protesters to go to a specific area. And this is not some a sovereign citizen conspiracy theory. This was from BBC Law Report in 2016. Australian police authorities buying up sound weapons, and goes into the ethics here. They can break up protests with loud, piercing sound, but long-range acoustic devices, LRADs, can cause permanent hearing damage. Australian lawyers from ages is now investing in the technology, but sound and law experts say their potential use is extremely concerning.
Yeah, that is extremely concerning. I've also looked into EMR technology, like electromagnetic radiation, and how that can be used as a form, like a warfare technique. We're seeing technology increase. We're going to see a bunch more, devices and mechanisms used to stop people from gaining back their freedoms. It's getting concerning. I mean, I was concerned about the rubber bullet situation, because rubber bullets, they can kill people. So that is full on tyranny. And John Howard had the bright idea of taking our guns away with a gun buyback. So, thanks, John Howard, for that. But now we have nothing to really defend ourselves from tyranny. The problem with Australian legislation is that we don't actually have a Bill of Rights. So the rights in the Constitution, they're not really rights as much as they are limits on government power.
Well,
So
Australian Constitution, it's more just a division of powers document, and which is basically why our governments can basically pass a law to do whatever they want.
yeah, essentially, we don't have those amendments that America has, which I think is largely why they're regaining their freedoms at a lot quicker pace than Australia will. Australia will be one of the hardest nations to regain back our freedoms because of our rights situation. So, and the lack of guns now. So, like I said, and like Robert Spalding said, we're the testing ground for communism. I think that's why CCP's targeted this nation, because of our lack of legislative strength when it comes to rights and things like that. It's the perfect nation to actually infiltrate. It's the perfect nation, Australia.
Going back to what you said at the beginning, you questioned the legality of Mark McGowan excluding unvaccinated MPs from Parliament. Dan Andrews has done the same thing here. The problem with trying to test whether those public health orders are actually unlawful, someone has to make a case to the courts, and all the court justices, they're all appointed by the major party politicians. They're not going to go against the people who appointed them and gave them their position. I can't believe that the High Court ruled that WA's hard border back in 2020 was lawful when Clive Palmer challenged WA's hard border. There's Mark McGowan is being ordered to attend the Clive Palmer's defamation trial against him in Sydney. There's rumours that Mark McGowan will open the border so he doesn't have to quarantine when he comes back.
Mm-hmm.
But on like governments passing laws to just the railroad citizens, the WA Parliament passed that law to basically say that Clive Palmer couldn't get just compensation for a mine deal that they cancelled. To deny him his natural legal rights.
That's interesting. I mean, like, we're seeing a greater state overreach into the judicial arm of government. You're not supposed to see that. This is basic constitutional stuff. They teach it in like first year law school. You've got the separation of powers. You've got the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. You're not supposed to have like overlap between the politicians and the courts. What we're seeing now with these mandates in place on courts and more kind of executive overreach into the courts, that's actually breaking very, very primary fundamental principles of the Constitution. And they're getting away with it. So that's what happens when you're dealing with mass corruption. Basically, government can do what they want. And even if it's unlawful, I mean, who cares? The courts are corrupted, and so there's no law in this country, essentially. So I don't know how we're going to win this. I don't think it's going to be in the courts because of the corruption. I don't know if politics is going to be even, like, as in the executive is going to be where we win this. I think it's going to take people power. So I think journalists, I think it's what commentators are doing. I think just waking up enough people, gaining manpower, I think that's actually going to be, like the convoys and things, that's what's going to be what regains freedom, because it's not going to happen in the corrupt bodies themselves. If they're corrupted, you can't go there for help.
And like you said before, I mean, when Scott Morrison saw the convoys, is like, hey, I was never in favor of any mandates. What are you talking about? He just turned to water immediately. And obviously, the inspiration from Canada is all of these power hungry premiers, as it's pronounced over there, just melting away their mandates and passports. So it can be done, and there's a lot of elections coming up. Federal election in May. We've got the Victorian state election in November 2022, and the New South Wales state election in March 2023. Unfortunately for you over west, Mark McGowan, absolute power until March 2025, though. As we established, he's losing his absolute support. So I hope that you can be set free soon. Is your whole family based in Western Australia, or have you been separated from any family, friends during the past 2 years?
Luckily, no. I do have family overseas. I've got family in Africa, India, and America. So haven't been able to see them. So it's very sad for me.
I've had many West Australians on during the past 2 years. Earlier this month, they had Dennis Hutts, Perth Patriot, on. I've also interviewed Stephen Wells. He's been to a lot of the Perth Freedom rallies. He wrote the great COVID swindle. And also Tanya Stapleton, a finance worker who, before the pandemic, was just an ordinary mum, but yes, through her own humorous ways, has managed to satirize McGowan.
Oh, did you want to see my comic? It's a Valentine's Day special.
I downloaded a copy for it. It was an excellent piece of art. You posted a video on your Telegram channel, how you painted it, but
that's all you can do, like make fun of it, and because the alternative is crime, just that sort of thing. And also just to avoid defamation. I mean, it's very hard to come at artists.
Though sometimes the real life art is even more absurd than anything you could create with. What was it? Father's Day last year, WA Labor signed the Father's Day card for the state dad.
Yeah. Oh dear.
But there was also there was a marketing guy. He created the State Daddy-O's Fruit Loops cereal. People didn't realize how actually satirical it was, because there's a reason he picked Fruit Loops for the State Daddy-O's. And then, I'm not sure if you heard about that, but on the back had like a maze where you've got to escape the WA hard border.
Oh, that's ingenious. Are they still selling that cereal?
I'm not sure. Like, it was in the media cycle for a couple of days, but yeah,
Oh,
there was a lot of demand for them.
it's very clever.
Mm.
Might have to look into that.
Now, you display your art and also some of your musical recitals, as well as your commentary on your Telegram channel. You're also on Getter because you've been censored on mainstream social media.
Yeah. So the main use are Getter and Telegram. Probably post the most on Getter. I like how there's a lot of Americans on there who are solid patriots. So you get a lot of switched on American allies there. So I like Getter for that reason. Telegram's operated by Russians, I think, which is not terrific. So might have to jump platform there soon.
Yeah, we've got the new unholy alliance now between Russia and China that they signed at the Beijing opening ceremony. War with Ukraine did not happen yesterday, as the US and NATO were predicting. It seems like that Putin is just basically doing a massive troll by having this whole build up of force, and so the West will say, look, he's about to invade, and then withdraw and say, sucked in, look at you fake news media, you said there would be a war there.
Yeah, I have no idea. I have to look more into the Ukraine situation. I have to be honest and looked much into that, but it's very hazy, my view of that, because I don't know what's going on exactly.
I have a Getter account, but I hardly use it because, well, I'm not sold on it, because I know that there have been people who have been already deplatformed from Getter. I still think Gab is the ultimate free speech platform. Andrew Torba, who runs Gab, he is determined to build it into basically alternative technology platform. Like, he's working on a Gab TV, Gab smartphone. He's a Christian nationalist, so he's driven by both faith and patriotism to make Gab to basically have a platform that is ultimately deplatform proof. Recently launched Gab Pay as well. He's got his own news aggregation with Gab as well. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, I do have Gab as well. I've heard good things about Gab. I do have Gab. I should probably post more on there. Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that.
And thank you for joining me tonight. I know you're very busy with all of the things you do, your legal studies, and obviously you have your multitude of hobbies as well. So thank you so much, and hopefully sometime soon we can meet in person. That's the reason why I mentioned all the Perth people that I'd interviewed, because I can only see them through a screen.
Yeah, I know. Like, all the good, interesting comments and comment happens over East, I have to say. In WA, I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. I'm not plugged into those Eastern networks so much. So it's nice. Thank you so much for offering me this platform. And it was a great interview. Thank you.
And I'll see you all tomorrow night. Thank you for everyone in the live chat for your comments. I'll be back tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Melbourne time, on the Unshackled YouTube channel for Trad Tasman Talk with Stephen Berry, where we'll discuss Jacinda Ardern's government using Trudeau-type tactics to remove the New Zealand convoy outside the Parliament House in Wellington. And of course, new reports from Tiger Mountain with Richard Wollstonecroft continue to be published as well, including the Odyssey and BitChute exclusive episode where he talked about his experience with COVID. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I'll see you tomorrow night. Keep checking out theunshackled.net for our archive and articles as well. Good night.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting theunshackled.net to view all our shows and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.